comrades, and thank you for joining us on this live stream to celebrate the anniversary of the October Revolution and the anniversary of the founding of the International Brigades. We're celebrating these two events today in a reduced capacity because of the pandemic, but we're glad that you can join us online, and we're happy to celebrate these in any way we can. And of course, the most meaningful way to celebrate the October Revolution and to remember the brave volunteers of the International Brigades is to get involved in the struggle, is to build a live, vibrant, working class movement that can really challenge the things that these brave people are fighting against. And these two events are very similar in many ways. They were both working class uprisings against imperialism. In the case of the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks and the working classes and peasants of Russia rose up and fought against firstly the Tsar in the February Revolution, and then the Social Democrats who continued the First World War and Russia's involvement in it in the October Revolution. In the case of the International Brigades, we saw international volunteers from across Europe and across the world in the context of fascism rising across Europe, in Germany and Italy in the post-war period, coming to fight against fascism in Spain. Now, why did they do this? Why did they give up whatever lives they had before to go and fight in a country that was not their own? Well, the answer is that they were proletarian internationalists, and they recognised that the working class has no country of its own, or it didn't until the Soviet Union was founded in 1917. But they recognised the need to fight against fascism, and fascism was a reaction in Europe against inter-imperialist domination and wars to divide the world. And it saw the crushing of working class movements in Germany and Italy, which were some of the most vibrant and large in Europe at the time. And that's something we have to remember. Fascism is a response to a working class that is standing up for itself, that is fighting for its rights, that is fighting against the oppression, domination and exploitation in this world. And it's something that we can still recognise in Britain today. The reasons for the world wars, the reasons for fascism has not disappeared today just because we've had a few decades since that time. The causes are still laid in the bones of capitalism. And we have to understand this history in order to understand what we can do to build a better future. Because these were responses to people fighting and struggling for a better future for themselves and their families, the working class standing up for itself. So I'm going to ask you to give a couple of minutes silence, 2 minutes silence, as we lay a wreath in memorial of the brave volunteers of the International Brigades, some 1,800 of which came from Britain, and most of whom were communists, and the fighters in the October Revolution who overthrew oppression, and the workers who built that state into a place that was the envy of the world, that led to workers in Britain and the rest of the world questioning, why can't we have healthcare? Why can't we have education? Why can't we have jobs? And it's particularly poignant to ask those questions today, as in Britain we see rising inequality, rising poverty. Some 5 million, at least by the end of this year, will be facing destitution, uncertain whether they can afford shelter, food, whether they can even take their kids to school. The Economist ran a story recently about the revival of stately homes in Britain. The ultra-rich, the ultra-wealthy are building modern-day feudal palaces in the countryside, while hundreds, if not thousands of children are living in temporary accommodation without access to adequate food, without access to even education. We are returning to Victorian times, and that is something we have to realise and organise to fight against. But now I'll ask you to join us in 2 minutes silence as we lay a wreath in memorial of these brave fighters of the working class. Thank you.
I think it had to be in the other sense.
comrades, today we are celebrating the heroic October Revolution. In celebrating, we remember the greatest feature of this revolution and the condition for its victory, the organization of the proletarian masses, the organization of the working people. We honor the memory of the martyrs devoted to the revolutionary cause who gave their lives putting their ideals into practice. History long ago has proven that in the course of the struggle for a better world, great revolutions bring great men and women to the forefront and develop abilities that had previously seemed impossible. Very few believed it would be possible when the Bolsheviks, leading the workers and the soldiers, took state power and handed it over to the Soviets. Of course, things don't happen in one day, November the 7th, 1917. The economic collapse and the collapse of the army in Russia had started much earlier. It was the inevitable consequence of the process which had begun in 1915. The sellout reactionaries who controlled the Tsarist court were consciously leading Russia to disaster in order to prepare a separate peace with Germany. The lack of weapons on the front, the lack of food in the army and in the big cities, the dismantling of industry and transport in 1916 were all part of a huge sabotage campaign which got interrupted by the March Revolution. This great moment, which unexpectedly gave freedom to 160 million of the most oppressed people of the world. But the affluent classes desperately wanted a political revolution that would remove power from the Tsar and give it to them. They wanted a constitutional democracy or a constitutional monarchy. But the masses of people demanded a genuine workers' and peasants' democracy. That is why in Russia, the political revolution turned into a social one, and it found its culmination in the triumph of Bolshevism. Historians often emphasize the ignorance of Russian workers at the time of the revolution. It is true that they did not have political experience, but in return, the workers went through the great schooling of the practical organizations, the Soviets, that are a manifestation of the organizational genius of the working masses. Many justify their hostility to communism and to Marxist-Leninism by saying that the Russian Revolution was supposedly a struggle of the law-abiding elements of society against the cruelty of Bolshevism. In reality, it was the rich who, seeing the power of revolutionary organizations growing, decided to crush them. To stop the revolution, the bourgeoisie resorted to desperate measures. It always does. To overthrow the Soviets, they disrupted transportation, they caused internal unrest, they shut down businesses and factories, hid fuel and hid raw materials. To disband the frontline military committees, they reinstated the death penalty. This is the cruelty of the bourgeoisie. But this was a wonderful spark for the Bolshevik fire. The Bolsheviks responded by teaching the masses about class struggle and declaring all power to the Soviets. Outside the Bolsheviks, there were groups of so-called moderate socialists, the Mensheviks, as well as other small parties. But the strength of their resistance was undermined by their own theories. The Bolsheviks won because they were not only a force for destruction of the old order, but the only party that had a creative program and enough power to carry it out. It is this effort by Soviet power to construct socialism that we must study. Construct on the basis of the economic law of socialism, that is the coordination of production to satisfy the needs of society. We must study how the planned organization of social production secured the well-being and the free development of all members of society. The victory of the October Revolution of 1917 demonstrated the liberating nature of socialist relations of production. It revealed the superiority of central scientific planning on the solid ground of working class power, of social ownership over the means of production. It eliminated unemployment and illiteracy. It made general and compulsory free education. The 8-hour workday, the real equality of men and women in work and life, the liberation from racial prejudices, as well as leaps that we saw in art, culture, science and medicine, are some of the characteristic examples of the first decades of Soviet power. And these were achieved under very harsh conditions of imperialist invasion, of imperialist encirclement, under great shortage of material assets and of experts. But proletarian revolution quickly bridged the gulf, miraculously bridged the gulf that separated Tsarist Russia from the strong capitalist states. With social ownership and a planned economy, labor productivity increased dramatically, and the working person was freed from his bonds, since he no longer sought a boss in the jungle of the capitalist market to sell his labor power. New scientists, new artists were created from among the children of the working class and of the poor peasants. Today, in this current climate, in this pandemic, we understand more than ever the superiority of the central planning of proletarian power over the capitalist market, where the monopoly dualism teaches us that the dictatorship of the proletariat can fulfill its mission when it relies on the mobilization of the workers, so that the goals are actively adopted by the broad masses of the people. Many will say today, power, but the legacy of proletarian revolution, the legacy of Marxist-Leninism is strong precisely because its roots run deep. We know that it can set in motion new men and new women, young people that will take the place of those who gave their lives in the struggle, to continue their cause, to walk along the road they pursued and complete what they began. Today, we have more opportunities and more responsibilities because we can study the historical experience of the 20th century. At the same time, we can take advantage for socialist construction of the new objective possibilities that are created by the digital era. Many constraints that existed in Russia of 1917 do not exist today. Today, we have an army of salaried scientists who belong to the working class. Those did not exist in October 1917. We have so many possibilities for planning to make quick and optimal decisions on complex problems based on technology to collect and process large volumes of data and information, to keep people alive, to meet the totality of society's needs, to prevent and confront all the health and all the climate threats that pose risks for millions of people. These possibilities exist, but we need to liberate them from the chains of market competition, from the aim of capitalist profit. The necessity and historical urgency for socialism are felt today more than ever before. And it is only working class power that can provide consistent answers to our current problems from the perspective of social prosperity and of public well-being. Only socialism can respond to the changes in the content of labor that will come with automation, without workers being at risk and living in fear of unemployment, without medical care or pensions, and without dignity, as we see under capitalism today. The international brigades, in the memorial of whom we stand today, knew that only socialism can fight barbarism. The international brigades are a reminder of the solidarity that the international communist movement can forge. Formed from volunteers from over 40 countries, the brigades owed much to the leadership and support of the Soviet Union, together with the hundreds of thousands of communists working in every part of the world, like British communists David and Isabel Crook, who joined the brigades. Spanish communists were the children of the October Revolution. The Russian Revolution had provided a powerful stimulus for social upheavals in Spain, and Bolshevism spared the revolution in Spain from below. In the face of fascist tide, the Popular Front was the only way towards a socialist society and a means of defending democratic freedoms. There was the need to defend the Soviet Union, that was the first socialist state, and which was Hitler's main target. From the beginning of the Civil War, the civil leadership proclaimed that the Republican cause was the cause of progressive mankind throughout the world, as the fight against fascism is today. We must remember the Niños de Rusia, the 2,895 children that were evacuated to the Soviet Union by the Republicans during the Spanish Civil War. Without this solidarity produced by the Russian Revolution, the proletariat could not achieve the final victory over fascism that we saw in the Second World War. Today, by declaring ourselves children of October, children of the international brigades and of the martyrs of the Spanish Civil War, we honor, we preserve the revolutionary legacy. It is a pledge that ever-growing numbers of proletarians, guided by their example, will march forward to the complete victory of the world communist revolution. Long live the October Revolution.
Que viva!
Long live Marxist-Leninism.
Long live! Long live! Do you want me to relay? Yeah.